My name is Amelia, and at 28, I never thought my own family would try to kill me. Growing up, I learned to dodge my sister Jessica's rage and my mother's indifference. But that midnight attack with a dining chair changed everything. As my ribs cracked and blood filled my lungs, my own mother just stood there smirking. What the doctor discovered afterward would finally expose our family's darkest secret. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to join our survivor community. I used to believe all families had their problems, that the tension in our house was normal. But looking back, I can see how the darkness crept in gradually like a slow-moving storm that you don't notice until you're already drenched. My earliest memories are actually happy ones. When I was around 4 or 5, my dad would swing me around in the backyard of our small suburban home in Michigan. Mum would sometimes join in, and Jessica, my older sister by 2 years, would laugh alongside us. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. Dad worked as a mechanic at the local garage, while Mum picked up shifts as a waitress at the diner down the street. The change began subtly when I was about 7. Mum started having these unpredictable mood swings. She'd be perfectly fine one moment, then explode over something minor the next. Dad tried to shield us, often taking Jessica and me for ice cream when Mum was having one of her days. By the time I turned 8, their marriage had crumbled. I remember hiding at the top of the stairs listening to their final argument. "I can't take it anymore, Linda," Dad said, his voice breaking. "The way you treat Amelia, it's not right." "She's just like your mother," Mum hissed back. "Always perfect, always judging me with those eyes." I didn't understand what she meant then. How could my 8-year-old eyes judge anyone? It would take me decades to understand that statement and its deadly implications. After Dad left, Mum's favoritism toward Jessica became impossible to ignore. On my 9th birthday, Jessica received new clothes, even though it wasn't her special day. When I asked about my gifts, Mum shrugged and said, "We're tight on money this month. Maybe next time." A week later, Jessica got a new bike. Little incidents piled up like snowflakes, eventually creating an avalanche of inequality. When I brought home straight A's, Mum barely glanced at my report card. When Jessica passed with C's and D's, Mum took her out for celebration dinners. "School isn't easy for everyone," she'd say, shooting me a warning look not to comment. Jessica quickly learned she could get away with anything where I was concerned. She began small, taking my things without asking, breaking my coloured pencils accidentally, spilling juice on my homework. When I complained, Mum would sigh dramatically. "Stop being so sensitive, Amelia. She's just being a normal kid." Despite everything, I tried to maintain a relationship with my sister. I'd offer to help her with homework or invite her to join me and my friends at the park. Sometimes she'd accept, and for brief moments, I'd glimpse the sister I wanted so desperately to connect with. But these moments never lasted. The worst early incident happened when I was 11. I'd saved up my allowance for months to buy a delicate glass ballerina music box. It played Swan Lake when opened, and I treasured it, keeping it safely on my highest shelf. One afternoon, I came home from school to find it shattered on my bedroom floor. When I ran downstairs crying, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table with Mum. They both turned to look at me with identical expressions of annoyance. "Jessica broke my music box?" I sobbed. "I didn't touch your stupid box," Jessica snapped. Mum placed her hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Amelia, stop accusing your sister. Maybe you left it too close to the edge." "But I didn't. It was on the top shelf." "Enough." Mum slammed her hand on the table. "Go clean up the mess and stop bothering us with your drama." As I turned to leave, I caught Jessica smirking at me behind Mum's back. These patterns continued, but I found escape in academics. Books became my sanctuary and school my safe haven. Teachers praised my writing and analytical skills, and I threw myself into every assignment. My dream of becoming a nurse began taking shape in junior high, when the school nurse Mrs. Patterson let me help organise the health fair. The idea of healing others gave me purpose. Mum seemed to resent every achievement. When I was chosen for the advanced placement program, she scoffed. "Don't expect me to drive you to special classes." When the school called to tell her about a state essay competition I'd won, she told them she was too busy to attend the ceremony. But still, I held on to hope that someday, somehow my mother would see me, really see me, that my sister would become the friend I longed for. I didn't understand then that in some families, these hopes are not just unlikely, they're dangerous. By 16, I had created something of a life for myself, despite the growing hostility at home. I worked part-time at the local pharmacy, stacking my schedule with as many hours as they'd give me. Every dollar went into a secret savings account that Mrs. Patterson had helped me set up. "Your ticket out," she called it, with a knowing look that told me she suspected more about my home life than I admitted. At school, I maintained a perfect GPA while participating in the Future Healthcare Professionals Club. My applications for nursing scholarships were already in progress, though I kept this information from my family. Experience had taught me that any of my plans could become targets for sabotage. Meanwhile, Jessica was 18 and spiraling. She'd dropped out of high school junior year, claiming it was a waste of time. Most days she slept until noon, then disappeared with friends until the early morning hours. When she was home, the house filled with the harsh sounds of her arguments with Mum about money curfews and her new boyfriend Travis, who had already been arrested twice for drug possession. Despite their frequent fights, one thing remained constant: I was their common enemy. If Amelia wasn't always showing off, maybe you wouldn't feel so bad about yourself. Mum would tell Jessica during their arguments. She thinks she's so much better than everyone. Jessica would agree, their mutual resentment of me temporarily bridging their own conflicts. The first truly frightening physical incident happened shortly after Jessica's 19th birthday. I was coming up the basement stairs with a basket of laundry when I felt a hard shove from behind. The world tilted sickeningly as I tumbled down the wooden steps, the laundry basket flying from my grip. My head struck the concrete floor and pain exploded behind my eyes. When I regained full consciousness, Mom and Jessica were standing over me. "She just fainted and fell," Jessica was saying, her voice unconvincingly concerned. "I didn't faint," I mumbled, touching the growing lump on my forehead. "She pushed me." Mum's eyes narrowed. "Don't be ridiculous. Why would your sister push you? You probably got dizzy from starving yourself. I've noticed you barely eat dinner anymore." I hadn't been eating dinner because there often wasn't enough. Mum had lost another waitressing job and the refrigerator contents had grown increasingly sparse. What food we did have, Jessica claimed first. The next day at school, my English teacher, Mr. Collins, noticed the bruise on my forehead and the way I winced when sitting down. "Amelia, can I speak with you after class?" he asked quietly as he handed back our essays. When the room emptied, he closed the door and asked directly, "Is everything okay at home?" "Fine," I answered automatically. "I just fell down the stairs. Clumsy moment." He studied me for a long moment. "You know, it's interesting. I've known you for almost 3 years, and I've never once seen you be clumsy. Quite the opposite, actually." I stared at my hands, unable to meet his eyes. "If you ever need to talk," he said gently, "my door is always open, and there are people who can help whatever the situation might be." I nodded and escaped to my next class, heart pounding. What would happen if I told someone the truth? Would they even believe me? And if they did, what then foster care? Being separated from everything familiar, as bad as home, was the unknown seemed terrifying too. The only person I trusted enough to confide in was my best friend Taylor. We'd been close since 7th grade when she defended me against bullies who made fun of my second-hand clothes. "You need to get out of there," Taylor insisted when I finally revealed the truth about the stairs incident. "My parents would let you stay with us in a heartbeat. You know that, right?" I did know. Taylor's parents had always welcomed me, inviting me for dinner multiple times a week, noticing when I needed new clothes and, coincidentally, having extras in just my size. They never pushed, but I could see in their eyes that they suspected my home life was troubled. "I can't," I said. "I'm so close to graduating and getting that scholarship. Just a little longer and I'll be gone legally." What I didn't tell Taylor was that I was also afraid of what Jessica might do if I left. Her anger had been escalating, and the thought of abandoning my few possessions to her rage was unbearable. Among those possessions was the only photo I had of my dad and me taken at the zoo just weeks before he left. The situation at home deteriorated further when I discovered my bank account had been emptied. All $2,342 that I'd saved over 2 years of working weekends and summers gone. When I confronted my mother, shaking with anger and fear, she sighed dramatically. "Jessica needed it for an emergency. You'll get it back eventually." "What emergency?" "That was my money." "Don't be so selfish, Amelia. Your sister got evicted. Would you rather she lived on the street? Besides, you're so smart with all your scholarships. You don't need money like she does." I later learned the emergency was Jessica buying a used car that broke down within a month and paying off drug debts for Travis. Not a penny would ever be returned to me. That wasn't the last time I was forced to lend money to Jessica. Every paycheck became a battle to hide enough to rebuild my escape fund. I worked extra shifts, often closing the pharmacy at 10, then staying up until 2, studying to maintain my grades. Exhaustion became my constant companion, but determination burned even stronger. 6 more months, I told myself. Just hold on 6 more months until graduation. Little did I know that escaping home would prove both easier and harder than I had ever imagined. The day my acceptance letter arrived from the nursing program at Michigan State University was the best day of my life up to that point. Not only had I been accepted, but I'd received a scholarship that would cover most of my tuition. The campus was 2 hours away, far enough to justify living in a dorm rather than commuting. I hid the letter in my school backpack, but Mum found it while searching my room for money. I came home to find her reading it at the kitchen table. "So you think you're leaving, huh?" she said without looking up. "I got a scholarship," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the anger rising at her invasion of my privacy. "It's a really good program. You can commute. We need your pharmacy paychecks for bills. It's 2 hours each way. I couldn't work and go to school with 4 hours of driving every day. Not my problem. Family comes first, Amelia. Or haven't I taught you anything?" The argument escalated until Jessica came home and sided with Mum as usual. But for once, I stood my ground. "I'm going and I'm living on campus. The scholarship includes housing." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The housing would come from my rebuilt savings and additional work-study hours. I'd make it work somehow. Mum's face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you. This is how you repay me, by abandoning your family when we need you." I almost faltered, then decades of conditioning making me question my right to pursue my own life. But then Jessica chimed in. "Let her go, Mum. We don't need her judging us all the time anyway." For once, Jessica's resentment worked in my favor. 2 months later, I moved into a tiny dorm room with a roommate named Priya, whose family had immigrated from India when she was 10. The contrast between Priya's loving, supportive family and my own was painful but eye-opening. The care packages her parents sent, the weekly phone calls filled with encouragement, the genuine interest in her studies all showed me what family could and should be. For the first time, I experienced what it meant to live without constant fear. No one accidentally spilled coffee on my assignments. No one called me selfish for eating my own food. No one entered my space without permission. The relief was so profound that I sometimes found myself crying from sheer gratitude while walking to class. I made friends who valued me, professors who mentored me, and gradually began to understand that the problem had never been me. Through Priya and others, I saw what healthy family relationships looked like, and the revelation was both healing and heartbreaking. I limited contact with Mum and Jessica to occasional phone calls, usually ending with requests for money that I learned to refuse. "I'm on a tight student budget." I'd explain which was true. Between classes, clinical rotations, and work-study jobs, I barely had time to sleep, let alone extra money. Meanwhile, Jessica's situation continued to deteriorate. She moved in with Travis, then out, then in again, a cycle that repeated with each explosive fight. She lost jobs as quickly as she found them. Mum enabled her at every turn, making excuses, bailing her out, and continuing to blame me somehow for Jessica's choices. "She feels like she can never measure up to you," Mum said during one rare call when she wasn't asking for money. "That's why she acts out." I'd long since stopped pointing out the absurdity of this logic. How could Jessica feel inferior to someone who had been treated as lesser her entire life? In my 3rd year of nursing school, I met David, a medical student, doing a rotation in the hospital where I had clinical training. He noticed me struggling to manage a particularly difficult patient and stepped in to help without taking over, respecting my role even as he offered support. "You handled that really well," he said afterward as we documented our notes. "Most students would have panicked." "Dealing with difficult people is kind of my specialty," I replied with a small smile. We began meeting for coffee after shared shifts, which turned into study dates, which evolved into a relationship unlike any I'd known. David listened, really listened, when I slowly began sharing pieces of my past. He didn't dismiss my experiences or rush to fix them. He simply witnessed my truth and assured me that I deserved better. "Families are supposed to protect each other," he said one night, after I told him about Jessica pushing me down the stairs. "What happened to you wasn't normal or acceptable." Hearing someone validate what I had always felt but doubted helped me heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. By the time I graduated with my nursing degree and secured a position at Mercy Hospital in Grand Rapids, I had begun to build a life that felt safe, meaningful, and mine. I had also begun to believe that the worst was behind me, that distance and boundaries would be enough to keep the toxicity of my family from touching my new life. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday evening in April, 3 years after I'd graduated from nursing school. I was preparing dinner in my small but comfortable apartment when my phone lit up with Mum's number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, as our conversations never left me feeling better, only drained and guilty. But some residual sense of obligation made me answer. "Amelia, you need to come home right now." Mum's voice had the theatrical urgency I'd learnt to be wary of. "Jessica's in the hospital. It's bad." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, I didn't want harm to come to my sister. "What happened? Which hospital?" "County General. Please, she's asking for you." I should have verified before leaving. I should have called the hospital directly. But years of conditioned response kicked in, and I found myself requesting emergency family leave from the charge nurse, throwing clothes into an overnight bag and making the 2-hour drive back to my hometown in 90 minutes. When I arrived at County General and asked for Jessica Bennett at the registration desk, the receptionist frowned. "We don't have a patient by that name." Cold realization washed over me. I'd been lied to again. I called Mom, who didn't answer, then drove to the small house where I'd grown up, anger and concern battling within me. The house looked worse than I remembered, the paint-peeling gutters, sagging yard overgrown. I knocked, then used my old key when no one answered. The smell hit me first, a mixture of cigarettes, unwashed dishes, and something chemical that made my nursing instincts flare with alarm. "Hello," I called, moving cautiously through the cluttered living room. "Mom, Jessica." I found them in the kitchen, Mum and Jessica sitting at the table like nothing was wrong, drinking beer with a thin, twitchy man I assumed was Travis. "Finally decided to grace us with your presence," Mum said, raising her beer in mock toast. "The prodigal daughter returns." "Titan." Jessica didn't meet my eyes. "Surprise," she mumbled, picking at the label on her bottle. "You said Jessica was in the hospital." I said to Mum, still standing in the doorway, my body tense with the urge to flee. "Figure of speech," Mum replied. "Her spirit's been hospitalized by your abandonment." "That doesn't even make sense. I drove 2 hours because you lied to me about an emergency." "It is an emergency," Mum's voice hardened. "We're being evicted. 30 days notice." She slid a paper across the table. "Figured since you're so successful now you could cover what we owe. Family duty and all that." The eviction notice showed 3 months of unpaid rent, totaling nearly $4,000. "You called me here for money. Don't act so shocked." Jessica finally looked up. "It's not like you ever call unless we reach out first." There was some truth to that, but not for the reasons they implied. Every interaction left me emotionally depleted, fielding guilt trips and insults thinly disguised as concern. I'd learned that distance was the only way to preserve my mental health. "I can't give you $4,000, I said firmly. "I have my own rent, student loans, car payments." "But you have a fancy nursing job," Mum countered. "Big hospital, big salary. I'm still entry level, and healthcare doesn't pay as much as you think." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I can help you look for resources, maybe call some agencies that assist with housing, but I don't have that kind of money to give." "Resources," Mum spat the word. "Listen to Miss College talking about resources when her own family is about to be homeless." I noticed Travis shifting uncomfortably clearly, an outsider to our family dynamics. His eyes were bloodshot pupils, constricted hands, trembling slightly. Signs I recognized professionally. He was using something, probably opioids, given the epidemic in our county. "I'm sorry about the eviction," I said, meaning it despite everything. "But I need to head back. I have an early shift tomorrow." It was a lie, but I needed to escape the familiar undertow of manipulation. "You just got here," Jessica protested. "After driving all this way, you're not even staying the night." I hesitated, calculating the risks of leaving versus staying. It was already late past 9, and the drive back would put me home after 11. Exhaustion would make the journey dangerous, but staying meant being vulnerable in a house with 2 people who had hurt me repeatedly, and a man I didn't know who appeared to be on drugs. "I'll sleep in my old room and leave first thing in the morning," I conceded, instantly regretting the decision when I saw the look that passed between Mom and Jessica. My old room had been converted to storage boxes stacked on the bare mattress that remained. I cleared enough space to lay down and used my coat as a blanket, leaving the door closed but not fully latched. Old habits of vigilance die hard. Sleep came fitfully, my body remembering the need to stay alert in this house. Around midnight, I woke to raised voices from the kitchen, Jessica and Travis arguing, Mom occasionally interjecting. I strained to make out the words. She has to have money, Travis insisted. Nurses make bank. I told you she's being stingy, Jessica replied. Always has been. We need that cash, Jess. Vince isn't waiting anymore. I know. Let me think. Their voices lowered and I considered my options. The smart move would be to leave immediately, drive straight back to Grand Rapids despite the hour. But they might try to stop me if they realized I was leaving with the money they believed I had. I decided to wait until they went to sleep, then slip out quietly. I checked my phone, just after midnight. A few more hours and the house would likely be silent. I must have dozed off again because the next thing I knew, my door was crashing open light from the hallway silhouetting Jessica's figure. Get up, she demanded, voice slurring slightly. We need to talk. I sat up slowly, instantly alert. It's the middle of the night, Jessica. Whatever it is can wait until morning. No, it can't. She stepped into the room and I could see she held something at her side. Travis needs money. His deal is threatening him. That's not my problem, I said as firmly as I could while calculating the distance to the door. I told you I don't have extra money to give. Liar, she hissed. You always were a liar. Perfect Amelia with her perfect job and perfect life looking down on us. I've never looked down on you, I said slowly, standing. I just wanted to be safe. Safe from what? From us, your own family. She laughed, a harsh sound that raised the hair on my arms. We're not the problem, Amelia. You are. You've always been the problem. I recognized the signs of escalation, the way her breathing quickened, her free hand clenching and unclenching. I'm going to leave now, I said calmly, as if soothing an agitated patient. We can talk tomorrow when everyone's calmer. I took a step toward the door, and that's when Jessica revealed what she'd been holding, one of the wooden dining chairs from the kitchen. She lifted it with surprising strength, her face twisted with rage. You're not going anywhere until you give us what we need, she snarled. Jessica put the chair down. I raised my hands, palms out. You don't want to do this. You don't tell me what I want. She swung the chair with full force. I tried to dodge, but the cramped room left nowhere to go. The solid wood caught me squarely in the chest, and I heard a sickening crack as pain exploded through my ribcage. The impact threw me against the wall, where I crumpled to the floor, unable to draw breath. The pain was blinding, unlike anything I'd experienced. Each attempt to inhale sent shards of agony through my chest. I tasted copper and realized I was coughing blood, a red froth speckling the floor in front of me. Jessica, I wheezed. I need hospital. Through the haze of pain, I became aware of Mom standing in the doorway watching. There was no shock on her face, no mother's instinct to protect her injured child. Instead, she wore a small, satisfied smirk. Now you'll learn, she said quietly. You can't always run away from family obligations. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother watching me possibly dying on the floor and using the moment to teach a twisted lesson. Travis appeared behind Mom, his eyes widening at the scene. Holy shit, he mumbled. This is bad. Really bad. She's fine, Jessica said, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. Just being dramatic as usual. But I wasn't fine. My nursing knowledge told me the broken ribs had likely punctured a lung. The blood I was coughing confirmed it. Without treatment, pneumothorax could lead to respiratory failure and death. Call 911, I gasped, looking directly at Travis, who seemed the least committed to whatever madness had overtaken my family. The room started to darken around the edges as shock set in. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was my mother turning away saying, "Come on, Jess. Let her think about her choices for a while." And then darkness. I woke to the steady beep of a cardiac monitor and the sensation of something in my throat. Panicking, I tried to reach for whatever was choking me, but my arms were restrained. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. "Easy there, Amelia. You're intubated. Try to relax and let the machine breathe for you." My eyes focused on a middle-aged doctor with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. His ID badge read, Dr. Hammond Pulmonary Medicine. Next to him stood a nurse I didn't recognize and a uniformed police officer. I blinked rapidly, trying to communicate my confusion. "You're at Grand Rapids General," Dr. Hammond explained. "You were transferred here from County General once you were stable enough for transport. You've been unconscious for almost 3 days. 3 days. The realization sent a spike of anxiety through me, registering as a quickening beep on the monitor. "You're safe now," the nurse assured me. "Just focus on healing. Over the next 24 hours, I was gradually weaned off the ventilator as my condition stabilized. Once the tube was removed and I could speak hoarsely, the police officer, Detective Martinez, approached my bed. "Ms. Bennett, I need to ask you some questions about what happened if you feel up to it." I nodded weakly. "Can you tell me how you sustained your injuries?" My throat raw from intubation, I whispered the truth. "My sister Jessica hit me with a wooden chair. My mother watched and did nothing to help." Detective Martinez nodded as if confirming something. "That matches what the young man told us when he called 911. Travis called. This surprised me. "Yes, about 40 minutes after the assault. He said he waited until your mother and sister left the house, then called for help and stayed with you until the ambulance arrived." I hadn't expected that from Travis with his shifty eyes and drug habits. It seemed there was more humanity in my sister's troubled boyfriend than in my own blood family. "Your injuries were life-threatening," Detective Martinez continued. "Multiple broken ribs, a severely punctured lung, internal bleeding. The doctors say without medical intervention, you likely wouldn't have survived." The reality of how close I'd come to dying at the hands of my own sister washed over me. "Have you arrested Jessica?" "We took both your sister and mother into custody yesterday. They're claiming it was an accident during a heated argument that you fell and injured yourself." A familiar story, the same gaslighting they'd used my entire life, but this time I had witnesses and medical evidence. It wasn't an accident. After Detective Martinez left, promising to return for a formal statement, once I was stronger, Dr. Hammond came back to discuss my injuries and recovery plan. "You'll need significant rehabilitation," he explained, showing me x-rays of my chest. 4 broken ribs, one of which caused the punctured lung. We inserted a chest tube to re-expand the lung and drain the blood. You also have some contusions on your internal organs from the impact. As he pointed out the breaks on the x-ray, he paused, his brow furrowing. "Amelia, I noticed some older healed fractures here and here." He pointed to several areas on my ribs and one on my right arm. "These appear to have happened years ago. Were you aware of these previous injuries?" I stared at the x-ray, genuinely shocked. "No, I never knew about any broken bones." Dr. Hammond gave me a look I recognized from my own training, the careful, non-judgmental expression medical professionals use when suspecting abuse. "These old breaks show patterns consistent with non-accidental trauma. Based on the bone remodeling, they likely occurred during your childhood and adolescence." My mind reeled, replaying incidents from my youth. The time Jessica accidentally slammed my arm in the car door when I was 9. The numerous falls and pushes I'd endured. The times I'd been in pain for weeks, but wasn't allowed to see a doctor because it's just bruising, or stop being dramatic. "Are you saying I had broken bones that were never treated?" My voice shook. "That's what the evidence suggests," he confirmed gently. "Without treatment, bones will heal on their own, but often not optimally. You're fortunate there don't appear to be any significant long-term consequences from these untreated fractures." A child services investigator named Laura visited later that day. Though I was 28 and no longer under my mother's care, the nature of my injuries and Dr. Hammond's discovery of previous untreated fractures had triggered a mandatory investigation. "I'd like to ask about your childhood," Laura began after introducing herself. "Specifically about injuries or accidents you remember." For the first time, I spoke openly about my life with Mom and Jessica. The accidents that never seemed quite accidental. The preferential treatment Jessica received. The gaslighting that made me question my own experiences. "Did your mother ever take you to a doctor for injuries?" Laura asked. I thought hard. "Rarely. Once when I had strep throat that got so bad I couldn't swallow. A few times for school required vaccinations. But for injuries, she usually said we couldn't afford it." Laura took detailed notes. Even with financial constraints, most parents seek medical attention for serious injuries. The pattern of untreated fractures is concerning. As I spoke, memories surfaced that I'd buried for years. The time Jessica had pushed me off the backyard playset and Mom had only given me ice and told me to stop crying. The burning pain in my side after Mom had shoved me into the counter during an argument when I was 12, pain that had lasted for weeks. All those times I'd been injured and told I was exaggerating. I said slowly, realization dawning, I think they were hurting me on purpose, all along. Laura nodded sympathetically. Based on what you're describing and the medical evidence, there appears to have been a pattern of physical abuse throughout your childhood, possibly continuing into your adult life. The word abuse hung in the air. I'd always known my family was dysfunctional, that I wasn't treated well, but I'd never fully applied that label to my experiences. Somehow naming it made it both more real and more bearable, as if giving this monster a name stripped it of some power. That evening, David arrived, having driven directly from his hospital, when he finally reached me after days of unanswered calls. Seeing his face, the genuine concern and love in his eyes, broke something open inside me, and I sobbed for what felt like hours as he held my hand, careful not to disturb my IV or cause pain to my injured body. "I thought families were supposed to love each other," I whispered when the tears finally subsided. "Real families do," David replied. "And sometimes the family we choose is more real than the one we're born into." Awesome. In that moment, surrounded by medical professionals who had saved my life, supported by David's unwavering presence, and finally acknowledging the truth of my past, I felt the first stirrings of a new kind of strength. Not the brittle resilience I developed to survive, but something deeper and more powerful. I would not only survive this, I decided. I would use it to transform. 2 months after the attack, I entered the courtroom with a walker, my body still healing from the injuries that had nearly claimed my life. My attorney, Susan Winters, walked beside me, occasionally steadying me when pain made me falter. The proceeding was a preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to go to trial. Jessica and Mum had both been charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm, with Mum facing additional charges as an accessory. They sat at the defense table, Mum in a conservative dress I'd never seen before, Jessica in a borrowed blazer that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 28 years. When they saw me enter, Jessica quickly looked away. Mum stared defiantly, as if daring me to go through with this betrayal of family. I took the stand with difficulty, wincing as I raised my right hand to be sworn in. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Helen Grant, gently led me through my testimony from the deceptive phone call that brought me home to waking up intubated in the hospital. "And what did your mother say when she saw you injured on the floor?" Ms. Grant asked. "She said, 'Now you'll learn. You can't always run away from family obligations.'" My voice remained steady, though speaking those words again sent a chill through me. "Did she call for medical help?" "No, she and Jessica left me there." "And what medical conditions did you suffer as a result of this attack?" I recounted my injuries using my nursing knowledge to explain the severity in terms the jury would understand. Without medical intervention, these injuries would have been fatal. The defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, tried to paint me as the aggressor during cross-examination. "Isn't it true that you've always been jealous of the close relationship between your sister and mother?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I wanted a close relationship with both of them. They rejected my attempts." "And you resent having to help your family financially, don't you? That's why you refused to help with the eviction situation." "I couldn't afford to give them $4,000. I offered to help them find resources." He switched tactics. "You claim your sister hit you with a chair, but isn't it possible you fell during an argument and injured yourself on the furniture?" "No. She deliberately swung the chair at me. The medical evidence supports this was not a fall." The defense attorney looked frustrated by my calm responses, clearly having expected me to become emotional and perhaps less credible. But years of managing difficult patients had taught me how to remain composed under pressure. The real surprise came on the second day of the hearing, when a man I hadn't seen in 20 years entered the courtroom. Though his hair had greyed and lines had formed around his eyes, I recognized my father immediately. He nodded slightly as our eyes met, then took a seat in the back row. During a recess, he approached cautiously. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm so sorry for everything. Dad was all I could manage before tears threatened. The police contacted me as your next of kin after your mother and Jessica. I had no idea. I should have fought harder." Before we could say more, the bailiff called the court back into session. To my shock, my father was called as a witness for the prosecution. Under oath, he revealed the real reason he had left all those years ago. Linda was hurting Amelia. He testified, his voice breaking. "Little things at first, too rough when brushing her hair. Accidentally, closing doors on her fingers. I confronted her and she promised to get help." He paused, visibly struggling. "But it got worse. I found bruises on Amelia's back that couldn't have been from normal childhood accidents. When I said I was taking Amelia to the doctor, Linda became enraged. She threatened to claim I was the one hurting her if I reported anything." The courtroom was silent as my father continued. "I filed for divorce and tried to get custody, but Linda had convinced everyone I was unstable. She got full custody with me having only supervised visits, which she systematically sabotaged until I couldn't see Amelia at all. Did you continue to support your daughter financially? The prosecutor asked. Yes, I paid child support every month more than the court ordered. I also set up a college fund for Amelia. I gasped audibly. I'd never seen any of that money. I sent cards and letters too, Dad continued. But I later learned Amelia never received them. My mother's face had turned to stone, her previous facade of concerned parent crumbling as her lies were exposed. The prosecutor introduced evidence of my father's consistent child support payments and the college fund he had established money that had been diverted to unknown purposes. Additional witnesses included former neighbours who testified to hearing concerning interactions and seeing unexplained injuries on me as a child. Most damning was the medical testimony from Dr. Hammond about my current injuries and the pattern of historical fractures that had never been treated consistent with long-term physical abuse. When Jessica took the stand, I expected the same denials and accusations I'd heard my whole life. Instead, something unexpected happened. As the prosecutor questioned her about the night of the attack, Jessica's carefully constructed demeanour began to crack. "Did you deliberately strike your sister with a chair?" the prosecutor asked directly. Jessica's eyes darted to our mother, then back to the prosecutor. "I didn't mean to hurt her that badly," she whispered. "But you did intend to hurt her." A long pause. Then, "Yes." "Why?" Jessica's face crumpled. "Because Mum always said it was Amelia's fault. Everything was Amelia's fault. If Amelia wasn't so perfect, I wouldn't feel so worthless. If Amelia wasn't so selfish, we wouldn't struggle for money." Her voice rose. "My whole life, it's been, why can't you be more like your sister from everyone else? And your sister thinks she's better than you, from Mum." I didn't know what was true anymore. The prosecutor approached slowly. "Jessica, did your mother encourage you to hurt Amelia over the years?" Jessica looked at our mother, who was glaring at her with undisguised fury. Something seemed to break in my sister, then some final thread of loyalty. "Yes," she said clearly. "Mum would tell me Amelia deserved it, that hurting her would make me feel better." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The prosecutor pressed on. "And the night of the recent attack, did your mother know you were going to confront Amelia?" "It was her idea," Jessica admitted, tears now flowing freely. "She said if we scared Amelia badly enough, she'd give us the money. She told me to take the chair." As Jessica continued her testimony, the full, ugly truth emerged. My mother had resented me from birth because I resembled my paternal grandmother, a woman she had always been jealous of. She had systematically turned Jessica against me, creating a family dynamic where I was always the scapegoat, always the one who deserved punishment. "Did you know about the previous injuries?" the prosecutor asked. "The broken bones Amelia suffered as a child?" Jessica nodded miserably. "Some of them. Mum would tell me it was our secret that Amelia was too weak and would tell if she knew she was really hurt." By the time the hearing concluded, there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial. The judge, clearly disturbed by the testimony, denied bail for my mother, calling her an ongoing danger to the victim. Jessica, having cooperated and shown remorse, was released on bail with an ankle monitor. As I left the courtroom, leaning heavily on my walker, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and grief. The family I had longed for had never really existed. But in exposing the truth, I had finally freed myself from the prison of false hope and obligation that had constrained me for decades. Outside, my father waited hesitantly. "Amelia, I know I can never make up for not being there, for not protecting you. But if you're willing, I'd like a chance to explain everything, to try to be in your life again on whatever terms you're comfortable with." I studied his face, seeing genuine regret and love in his eyes. "I think I'd like that," I said softly, "but I'll need time." He nodded, understanding. "Time is something I'm willing to give. I've waited 20 years for a chance to know my daughter again. I can wait as long as you need." As David drove me home from the courthouse, I gazed out the window at the spring landscape trees budding with new life after the long Michigan winter. For the first time, I felt like I too might be on the verge of a new beginning, one built on truth rather than the lies that had shaped my past. Physical recovery from my injuries was a slow, often painful process. The broken ribs needed months to heal each breath, a reminder of how close I'd come to death. Physical therapy sessions were grueling as I worked to regain strength and mobility, but in many ways, healing my body proved easier than addressing the deeper wounds of my spirit. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, I began trauma therapy with Dr. Lydia Chen, a psychologist specializing in family abuse. In her calm office with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs, I began the difficult work of processing not just the recent attack, but the lifetime of mistreatment that had preceded it. What you experienced was not just physical abuse, Dr. Chen explained during one session. It was a systematic pattern of emotional and psychological abuse as well. Your mother created an environment where you were consistently devalued and scapegoated, while your sister was encouraged to participate in your mistreatment. But why? I asked the question that had haunted me since childhood. Why did she hate me so much? From what you've described, your mother appears to have what we call a narcissistic personality structure. She was unable to see you as a separate person with your own needs. Instead, you represented something she resented, possibly her own perceived inadequacies, projected onto you. Over weeks of therapy, I began to understand that my mother's treatment of me had never really been about me at all. I had been a convenient target for her own unresolved issues, a blank canvas onto which she projected her darkest emotions. And Jessica, desperate for our mother's approval and protection, had become a willing accomplice. As the criminal case proceeded toward trial, I received an unexpected letter from Jessica. Unlike Mom, who had sent several manipulative messages attempting to make me drop the charges, Jessica's letter seemed genuinely remorseful. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote. "I wouldn't forgive me either. But I want you to know I'm starting to understand how Mum played us against each other all these years. That doesn't excuse what I did, but I'm trying to get help now to understand why I let myself become the person who could hurt her own sister." After discussing it with Dr. Chen, I decided to respond with a short note, acknowledging her apology without offering immediate forgiveness. "Healing will take time for both of us," I wrote. "I hope you continue getting the help you need." While I worked on my emotional recovery, I also began rebuilding my relationship with my father, Robert. We started with coffee meetings, short conversations where he filled in the gaps of my childhood from his perspective. "I tried to get full custody," he explained during one of these meetings. "But your mother convinced the court I was unstable. She was always good at presenting herself as the perfect mother in public." "Why didn't you keep fighting?" I asked the question that had lingered for 20 years. Dad's eyes filled with tears. "I did for years. Every time I had a visitation, your mother would claim you were sick or had other plans. When I went to court about it, she would have documentation notes from doctors about your anxiety around me. Eventually, the court reduced my visitation to supervised only and even those she sabotaged." He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photo. I carried this everywhere. It was me at 8 years old the last time I'd seen him sitting on his shoulders at the zoo. "After about 5 years of fighting, I had a breakdown," he admitted. "The stress, the constant court battles, the pain of not seeing you, it was too much. I was hospitalized for depression. Your mother used that to get my visitation rights terminated entirely. But you kept paying child support," I said, "more than required." "Of course, you were my daughter. And I hoped someday when you were older you might look for me." "I did look," I told him, "when I was 19. But the address I had was old and I couldn't find you. I moved to Chicago for work," he explained. "I should have made sure there was a way for you to find me. That's on me." These conversations were painful but healing. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place, they helped me form a more complete picture of my childhood and the forces that had shaped it. David remained my steadfast support through all of this, attending therapy sessions, when invited, giving me space when needed, holding me through nightmares that frequently woke me sweating and trembling. 6 months after the attack, as we walked along the Grand River on a crisp fall evening, he stopped and turned to face me. "Amelia," he said softly, taking both my hands in his, "this past year has shown me just how strong and resilient you are. I fall more in love with you every day." As the river flowed behind him, carrying fallen leaves downstream, he knelt and presented a small velvet box. "I want to build a life with you, a family based on love and respect. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." The trial was scheduled for the following spring, almost a year after the attack. In the intervening months, Jessica had continued therapy and addiction treatment, acknowledging her role in the family dysfunction and cooperating fully with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony against our mother, she was offered a plea deal with reduced charges. Mum, however, remained defiant to the end, firing multiple lawyers who suggested she consider a plea. When the trial finally began, she represented herself a decision the judge repeatedly advised against. I testified again, stronger now, both physically and emotionally. This time when I described the lifelong pattern of abuse, I did so not from a place of pain, but of clarity and purpose. My goal wasn't vengeance, but accountability and hopefully prevention. If my story could help even one person recognize and escape abuse, the public exposure would be worth it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning their verdict. Mum was found guilty on all counts, including the historical child abuse charges that had been added as evidence of her long-term pattern of behavior. At sentencing, the judge called her a danger to her own children and society and imposed a 15-year prison term. Jessica, having pled guilty to lesser charges, received 5 years probation and mandatory continued psychological treatment. When I saw her at the sentencing hearing, she looked different somehow, both older and younger. The hardness had left her face, replaced by a tentative vulnerability that reminded me of the little sister I'd once hoped to protect. "I know sorry isn't enough," she said, when allowed to address me directly in court. "But I am sorry, Amelia, for everything. I hope someday you can believe that." I nodded, not ready for full reconciliation, but acknowledging her apparent change. "I believe you're trying," I said. "That matters." In the year following the trial, I channeled my experiences into creating a support group for survivors of family violence. Drawing on both my nursing background and personal history, I developed a program that addressed not just physical healing, but the complex emotional aftermath of family betrayal. What began as a small gathering in a community centre grew into a recognised resource that local hospitals and social services began referring patients to. Sharing my story publicly had been frightening, but the connections it created with other survivors proved invaluable, both for them and for my own continued healing. David and I married in a small ceremony by Lake Michigan, surrounded by friends who had become family, my father, who walked me down the aisle, and even Jessica, who attended quietly with her sponsor from her recovery program. My colleagues from the hospital created an honour guard with raised stethoscopes as we exited the ceremony, a nursing tradition that moved me to tears. On our first anniversary, David and I began discussing starting a family of our own. The prospect both thrilled and terrified me. "What if I don't know how to be a good mother?" I confessed one night. "I never had a proper example." David's response was gentle but firm. "You know exactly what not to do, which is more than many parents start with. And you have the most loving heart of anyone I've ever met. Our children will be fortunate to have you as their mother." I continued to exchange occasional letters with Jessica, who had remained sober and was working at a recovery centre, helping others overcome addiction. Our relationship was cautious, but gradually warming. She understood I needed firm boundaries and respected them, never pushing for more than I could give. With my father, the connection deepened more quickly. He moved back to Michigan to be closer, buying a small house just 30 minutes from ours. His presence in my life helped heal wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged, and his obvious pride in the woman I'd become, despite everything, soothed the child in me that had always wondered if she was worthy of love. 5 years after the attack that nearly took my life, I stood before a group of nursing students as a guest lecturer, sharing what I had learned about recognizing and responding to signs of abuse. As I looked at their young, earnest faces, I felt a sense of purpose that transformed my painful past into a force for positive change. "Family violence thrives in silence," I told them. "As healthcare providers, you may be the only ones who see the signs, the only safe person a victim encounters. Your willingness to see, to ask, to believe can literally save lives." After the lecture, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Your story helped me understand what's been happening in my own family," she said quietly. "I always thought it was normal, but listening to you, I realized it's not." I gave her information about resources and support groups, recognizing in her the same hesitant hope I'd once felt, the first stirrings of possibility that life could be different. That night, I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset, reflecting on the journey from victim to survivor to advocate. The pain would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life filled with love, purpose, and genuine connection, things I once believed were forever beyond my reach. The family we choose, I've learnt, can heal the wounds inflicted by the family we're born into. True family protects rather than harms, supports rather than undermines, celebrates rather than resents. And sometimes with tremendous courage and help, even broken family bonds can begin to mend, not into what they should have been originally, but into something new and cautiously hopeful. My mother remains in prison unrepentant. I've accepted that some people cannot or will not change, and that my healing couldn't depend on her acknowledgement or remorse. That was perhaps the most difficult lesson, but also the most liberating. My worth was never contingent on her validation. The physical scars from that midnight attack have faded, though my body remembers on cold days when my ribs ache with the changing weather. But they serve as reminders not of vulnerability, but of resilience. I survived, I healed, I transformed, and in that transformation lies the ultimate victory over abuse, the creation of a life so filled with meaning and love that the darkness of the past cannot overshadow the brightness of the present or the promise of the future. If you've experienced family violence, please know you're not alone. Your story matters and healing is possible. I'd love to hear in the comments about what helped you find strength in difficult times. If you found value in my story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too can reclaim their power and build a life beyond survival. Thank you for listening, and remember you are worthy of safety, respect, and love, regardless of what anyone else may have told you.